Everybody, to and another thing with Jim. I am here. We're recording on a Tuesday morning, November 4th. We're going to drop Wednesday morning, November 5th. And I am here with the latest trade acquisition for the Philadelphia Eagles, Pat McAdams. Pat, how are you?
I'm doing fine this morning. The Sixers are 5-1. Is that accurate?
It is. Yeah, who knew?
The Eagles are back, kind of cruising along.
Yes,
So Philly sports are on the upswing again, and then we'll see what happens in a couple weeks from now.
that is true. But it is it's a good day to be a Philly sports fan. We'll see what happens from here.
There we
That's never been famous last words.
go.
So, Pat, let's go ahead and talk some word and world. We are gonna keep with our standard sections, everybody, word, world, and wild card. And for the word section, I want to go back to the sermon from this past Sunday, where we were finishing up John's prologue, John 1:18. No one has ever seen God. The only God who is at the Father's side has made him known. And Pat, my thought to talk just for a couple minutes here is to go less on the theoretical side of things this morning, but just more on the practical about how, or takeaways, I'll put it this way, takeaways for me from the prologue of the Gospel of John versus that I've spent decades being familiar with, studying, doing Bible studies, sermons. But what has been striking me this time around? So I'll pitch you a couple ideas here. We could talk about it. I've been more convicted this time around that I need to pursue greater intimacy with God in my life. And that was something that is present and I've seen as present in the prologue of the Gospel of John for years and years, but having spent a lot of time studying, preaching through it, man, I really need to work on this if I'm going to apply God's word to my life in a deeper way, including from this past Sunday. This whole image of Jesus being at the bosom of the Father, so to speak, in the old King James version. Jesus was and is deeply intimate with the Father for all time. And that means that for us, Pat, Jesus opens that intimacy to us, and I need to practice it. So whether it's uh, Jesus being at the Father's side in John 17, the disciple that Jesus loved, being at Jesus' bosom or side during the Last Supper. And then finally, before I pitch it back to you from John 17, a couple verses I mentioned on Sunday, and this is eternal life that they know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. Eternal life is in a deep knowing relationship with God. And then Jesus prays for the church that they all may be one, just as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they also may be in us. That the intimacy that Jesus enjoys with the Father is what he invites us into and what we're called to practice. And I'm not super good at it. So I have a couple of practical thoughts here, but any general big picture, how are you doing with some of these things yourself? Or what do you think about that vis-a-vis the prologue of the Gospel of John?
I'm not super good at it either.
Okay.
Spoiler alert. Um, so their whole sermon to me was just about familiarity, intimacy, closeness, warmness, and I aspire to have that relationship with God, but I think I fall short a lot of times where it can be a little bit more colder, a little bit more
Hmm.
like transactional.
Yeah.
Like I need something for God. Hey God, when I was cruising along here, you were kind of like hovering around, but I didn't really need you. Or so I
Hmm.
thought. And yeah, so I think that's convicting. Is that I need to kind of establish and kind of practice more intimacy with God, and it's probably some of that is probably modern, a
Hmm.
modern thing as well, because you think about, or sometimes I kind of dwell upon, like, not that you have to always be like thinking about God throughout your whole day, but there'll be hours, days where I'm like, I haven't really like talked to God or thought about God too much, and like that seems
Hmm.
like a bad thing, and I kind of think like ancient people back in Bible times,
Yeah.
It seems to me, and maybe not, but it seems to me maybe they spent more time focusing on like God and loving God and connecting with God as opposed
Hmm.
to wondering, about the score of a Phillies game or who released a new single on Friday. And so yeah, I think some of that's modern, some of that's my also kind of thing. But yeah, kind of just realizing that, God isn't some distant, far out being that we can't relate
Hmm.
to. Like we should be relating to him in like a nice, more intimate way.
I think that's true. And Pat, I was going to mention also, and you beat me to it. I think it's a both and where, well, a couple of both ends. One, creation horizon plus fallen horizon, where we're created to know God and be in fellowship with Him. Both that and the fact that because we're in a fallen world and we're sinners, we prefer our own autonomy and our own being king ourselves and not necessarily coming under the kingship of Jesus. But then also, if this always has been a challenge, both that and I think modern life is compounding the challenges of that. I forget if I've mentioned this on the podcast so far. I try only to read one fiction novel at a time. As far as nonfiction, essays, books about culture, I just have stacks and stacks of them that seem to always go up but never down. The big piles. But with fiction, I'm a one book man, Pat, when it comes to fiction, where I try not to. Yeah, I want to finish one fiction book before starting another. I'm reading The 42nd Parallel by John Dos Passos right now. Are you familiar with John Dos Passos? He's a early 20th century American writer.
Not at all. No.
So it's okay if you're not. He's a little bit of one of those the band behind the band where band bands that we like will tend to cite this other band that nobody's ever heard of as being influential. So he was an early American modernist fiction writer who was read by Hemingway and Saul Bellow and John Updike as a prototype of modern, quote unquote, early 1900s uh, man wrestling with the modern condition in different ways. And it's kind of a sprawling history of the US in the 1910s on the brink of World War One. And in that book, kind of one of the main themes just overall is you have all of these mostly younger characters that are struggling with modernity, with mechanization, with urbanization, with markets and all of these larger, and you have a lot of Marxists running around. There's some debates between capitalism and socialism, which was a big, I had forgotten. I've read this in history books, but when Russia was going through their revolution, there were a lot of conversations in the US. Hey,
Yes.
should
Very
should
much
should
so.
we go? Uh, so you have some of those larger themes, but you have people that are sometimes thriving and sometimes wilting under the pressures of modern society as modern society becomes this industrialized monolith really for the first time in the history of the world. All that is to say, all those factors have continued to compound, and there is so much noise and distraction in our lives on multiple levels that intimacy with God is just really hard. And this may be Pat Pat Legal or Pat Media. You can edit this out. Uh, be, Strange to say on a podcast, I actually listen to a little less podcasts than I did a couple years ago
Yeah, that's coming right out.
to try to create a little more quiet in my life. And so I think podcasts are great, music is great, media is great, but also quiet is good too. There are no shortcuts to intimacy with God, and we live in a shortcut world right now.
Yeah, no, and I wonder if we need to be intentional about like we need to instead of kind of like we need to start eliminating things. Like I wonder if that is part of the solution. It's
Yeah.
kind of like, well, you already have these set things. I listen to all these podcasts and this music and this thing, but I also need to make more time for God. It's maybe we also need to eliminate some distractions and like be proactive in that way. Um,
Hmm.
as well. And that's not to say like we can't just proactively seek God and find time for Him, but that might be a hard decision some of us need to choose, whether it's whatever your outlet is that you recreation or hobbies, like maybe you need to
Hmm.
spend less time with that, and that's not
Hmm.
like a bad thing.
Yeah.
To kind of, draw that down. Um, the other thing that made me think of, and this is a little bit off topic, is
Hmm.
when you're talking about, people were thriving and people were suffering.
Yeah.
You think we're going through our own upheaval now with things like,
Hmm.
would you say there's a lot of people thriving right now in like the modern world? Like even people who are like, let's say people or who have money to invest in the stock market or own property or are heavy in AI and are rich, like would you say like either in like in their heart, in their soul that a lot of people are thriving right now? Not to be too like pessimistic, but it seems like I don't know, even the people who are kind of like doing well, it seems a little bit empty. Not to get out of the tangent or anything, but I don't know. And maybe that kind of is like part of the reason, like, people are, have an opportunity to seek God more right now to fill that, and that we should be
Yeah.
focusing on Him.
I think people are doing great, Pat. I
Okay.
don't know.
All right.
Yeah, just
Sounds
get
good.
out of whatever rabbit holes you're in right
Yeah.
now.
All right. Everything's
And
fine.
yeah, everything's fine. No, I think you're right. A few years ago, and I've mentioned this study in sermons before, or there's a cluster of studies maybe 10 years ago, studies of the super rich. And super rich is people that had some $1 billion or more. I forget the thresholds, but hey, are people with really a ton of money that much happier? And people with $1 billion statistically were asked, how much more are you happy? Do you feel secure? No. How much more do you need before you would begin to feel secure? And people with at least $1 billion said I would need at least 25% more. And so, yeah, billionaire is saying that I need at least 250 million more dollars before feeling secure. So finances are not the only axis with security and
Sure.
satisfaction and that sort of thing. But to use that as a proxy, yeah, it's never going to be enough. And the I mentioned this past Sunday the Ministry of Loneliness in England, which I actually did, you know, I've gotten in trouble over the past couple of years sometimes for not fact checking, and well, hopefully not a ton, but a couple of times I should have fact checked some stuff better, which I think has helped me to fact check better. But I did have to fact check. Wait, let me make sure that this wasn't just urban legend that England did have a some type of department of loneliness in the late 2010s, and it was true. So the as silly in English as that might sound as a solution, they're identifying the problem. So absolutely true, Pat. We are not thriving as people, and the connection there are more and more studies that talk about. Gen Z and Gen Alpha as generations that are more spiritually open than the previous ones. So, Gen X, Gen Y, and millennials, it's beginning to look as if, and there's all these think pieces and studies about the rise of the nuns, where you have more atheists, more agnostics, more people that think that any type of spirituality is bad. And so for hardcore secular people, their narrative of that is, and this is just going to be a trend that goes on forever. But it seems like that's not true, where there may have been a trough or a bottoming out with millennials and lack of openness to faith, but it's coming back. Not all of those coming backs are equally healthy and good or Christian for sure, but I think that that is a response to the futility and lack of thriving in the modern world.
Yeah, to your point on that, I have seen like more like studies and articles about more like spiritual seekers, and sometimes
Yeah,
that can be like, there's more male witches out there, so that it's certainly, yeah, it's not all obviously Christianity. I know you're not saying that, but yeah,
yeah,
there are people like seeking out something, or looking for something or acknowledging like they think there's something out there, and that's worth that. Um,
yeah.
the last thing that I'll say here, I also fact check,
Hmm.
and I also can confirm the loneliness department has a lot of stuff happening. Well, maybe not so much recently, but yes, it was a thing. Um, and then the last thing, I did like how you kind of talked about the Star Wars scroll, and
Uh-huh. Oh, nice.
made it very like cinematic as far as
Hmm.
like laying the groundwork, and kind of just when we're about to kind of like off to the races. I liked how it kind of how so far the sermons and how far the prologue of John is
Yeah,
setting everything up, and now it's go time. So thought that was cool.
I like that. Pat, let me give you two quick other things on my end, then we'll get to the world. The going back to the point that you were making about, hey, we should eliminate things. I think that's true. Two things. Uh, we've talked before about how we are creatures of finitude, according not to the fall necessarily, or this is part of the scarcity conversations.
Mhm.
Scarcity relates both to fall and creation, where scarcity is magnified at micro and macro levels because of the fall. But even according to creation, we are finite beings and we're not infinite ones. The If we are creatures with limits, it's probably naive of us to think I can increase giving bandwidth to seeking intimacy with God without having to eliminate things. And I think it's far more likely that for us to free up bandwidth, resources, space, time, energy, the the reality is we need to cut stuff out. And I think that's an invitation from the Lord to think about that everybody as they pursue Jesus. And then secondly, Advent is a good time to leverage some of those things. So at the Liberty Collingswood staff, we are deep into Advent prep. I think we're in some ways mostly done. We've set we've been running for a while now trying to get things ready, and now we're in the scramble tie up part. But let's use this season of Advent, one where we look forward to the arrival of Jesus to prepare room in our hearts for him. So do we want to get into the world now, Pat?
Let's do it.
Okay, the disclaimer before Pat pitches the subject to us is that, hey, I get this topic just a few hours beforehand, give a couple of quick thoughts on a napkin, and just start blabbing. The trade-off that we ask of our listeners is for me to speak more extemporaneously off the cuff, trying to apply biblical wisdom in real time to a messy world. My conclusions are not conclusive as much as, hey, this is just one Christian dude trying to figure stuff out. And if you disagree, don't panic, but write in to another with Jim at gmail.com. So, Pat, what are we gonna fix today? What are we gonna solve?
So when I'm slotting in Jim Anger as a writing candidate in November 2028, what type of gambling platform am I supporting? Pro, anti, pro with limitations? Is gambling in sports betting a sin? Are we taking advantage of those with an addictive personality? Is it ruining sports? Is it ruining young men primarily? Is it ruining society? Or is it just one of those things that's out there and, it's a vice and it's a sin and, it's going to take people down, but it's a society and we can't limit everything that we may see as evil and bad. So, any big thoughts here on gambling and sports betting that's obviously like running rampant right now?
Legally, I am not anti, but pastorally, I might be. I will
Okay.
say it. I will say it. I will say it that way. So, Pat, I imagine when you introduced this potential topic to me, on your mind was the NBA gambling scandal that hit the first day of the season. When is that true, or did that is that what put it on your radar again?
Partially, but like things pop up so frequently now.
Yeah.
But yes, that's certainly it's on the front of my mind is that's been a big topic recently.
Yes. So, for those that don't follow the NBA closely, on the first night of the new season, there was an NBA player and an NBA coach, both arrested for gambling transgressions. Terry Rozier, who terrorized the Sixers in a playoff series in the late 2010s, that seared into my brain. He had the playoff series of his life. Not really a good player, except that one year. When would that have been? 2017, 2018
Yeah. I
against the Sixers. Terry Rozier, a player, and then Chauncey Billups, potential Hall of Famer, or maybe he is in the Hall of
think
Fame.
he is a Hall of Famer, I believe.
Okay, right. Former Pistons point guard and coach of the Portland Trailblazers. They both shared insider information about who was playing, who was not playing. Rozier told a confidant of his that he was going to take himself out for a fake injury, bet the unders on me. And then there were arrests with larger implications for poker rings and stings and mafia families. And Pat, they blew up the Chicken Man in Philly last night, and it's still happening over and over and over again. A couple of thoughts approximately, and then I have a political question and a pastoral concern. Let me structure it that way. This is a predictable disaster, all of these gambling scandals. So there's a church growth and business organization author and speaker named Les McEwen who's coined the phrase predictable success. And you can hear the businessy aspects of that. And he says, if you want to succeed in your organization, success, if you do it right, is actually predictable. And there are proven methods that you so blah blah blah. He's actually and I actually try to implement some of those things. So Pat, I am predictably successful, as you know, and the just kidding. But well, I do try to practice some of his things, but predictable disaster. So as sports leagues, including the NBA, have cozied up and integrated, not only legalized, but integrated and cozied up and are financially dependent upon gambling companies as major funding sources for these leagues. Of course, there's going to be abuses to the system that are going to involve players and coaches, and we knew this was going to happen. So whenever you have league offices that are crying foul, saying that they're the Casablanca, shocked, I tell you that there is, gambling going on in this establishment, it rings hollow and is pretty sounds pretty hypocritical where yeah, like you knew this was going to happen and and so it is. I was listening and I forget what podcast this was on. Maybe Rights to Ricky Sanchez, which is one of the longtime Sixers process podcasts. When Michael Rubin was on, do you remember or do you know who Michael Rubin is? He
Yeah,
he's
yeah,
the okay, so he owns Fanatics, right? So
yeah.
he
He's
was
he's he's a weirdo, strange,
yeah.
guy. Very unlikable guy in my opinion.
Yeah, so not a popular guy. His Q ratings are not high, but Fanatics is a sports collectibles, sports clothing and merch company. He was a minority owner of the Sixers, and Fanatics is one of those conglomerate. They have their hands on a lot of different pots sports wise. But Ruben was casting vision for the future of sports entertainment. This was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. He said his goal that he's pushing for, and he says it's going to happen with or without me, is that sports in the US and around the world will increasingly become a 360-degree consumer entertainment experience.
Which is nauseating to hear.
He was really excited about it. Uh, but he said the future is when you're watching a game, you're not just watching a game, you are betting on the game continually in real time. You are, say you're looking at AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, they have really fun cleats on a given Sunday. You're checking out their shoes, you're buying their shoes. When the game is over and players are exchanging jerseys with one another, you're entering live auctions for being able to buy those jerseys. You're engaging with social media platforms as you're talking with lots of online people about the game. You're taking selfies of yourself watching the game. If you're watching on Amazon, and this is the model moving forward, the commercials. Ruben said the days of you're watching a commercial on network TV but not being able to click buy are numbered. So what's coming across the board is whenever you'd see a commercial, this is already largely true on our phones, but it's going to be true of any type of sports watching. Anything you see advertised ever, you will be able to buy from your phone in real time. I mean, spun off other examples too. And that's just where we are and where we're going, which is nauseating. But it seems like that's where the train is headed, and there's really nothing that we can do about it. There's a Harvard economist that a few years ago wrote a book. I have it here. What's it called? What Money Can't Buy: The Moral Limits of Markets. Michael J. Sandel. I read an essay from Sandel that adapted that the larger book, but he talks about how in modern life things that didn't used to be tied to money nearly as much as they are now very tied in with money. So this is what he wrote. Some of the good things in life are degraded and turned into commodities. So to decide where the markets or markets belong and where markets should be kept at a distance, we have to decide how to value goods in question. Health, education, family life, nature, art, civic duties, and so on. So just to use these examples, Sandel says that much less so in earlier times where things like health, education, family life, nature, art, and civic duties tied to how much money you have. But money affects so many additional aspects of our lives that than it used to. And that's simply the case with sports and gambling. So it's happening no matter what. And I think I'll turn it back over to you, Pat, before we get to the political question and pastoral concern. But I think what we're in for when it comes to sports and gambling is it's going to be a little bit like global cybersecurity cycles where you have governments and businesses that are continually trying to protect their clouds and their servers and data from cyber hackers. Hackers are always going to be one step ahead, and they're going to try to beat the system, and then there's catch up to shore up what's been breached, and that's going to be the case with sports gambling, whether it's players, businesses, owners, teams, when okay, they've stopped this leak here, and maybe there will be some limits on prop bets for minor players and small things that will shore up some of this stuff. But there's going to be other people that are working on other schemes that have not yet been safe-proofed, and it's just going to keep going. So, yeah, what's your take?
Well, my big takeaway from that is, as we kind of mentioned the Marxists earlier, maybe the
Yeah.
Marxists were right.
Oh my
That's
goodness.
my biggest takeaway. No, but
Pat Marxist, here we
yeah.
go.
Um yeah, as it's just such a bummer, and it's so like annoying watching, like, let's say sports and kind of focus on the sports aspect of that,
Hmm.
there's advertisements on all the jerseys, nothing really new, but it's getting worse. There's now
Yeah.
like in-game interviews with the managers in baseball. There's the little box with the strike zone. So, there's numbers popping up. They go to a
Yeah.
commercial, but it's a split screen. They have, like, Kevin Hart, Bet 360, all
Yeah.
that happening. And it's making me think, and maybe I'm just like becoming older or a curmudgeon. Like, man, it was nice watching baseball in like 1994. Uh,
Yeah.
and like something about it just kind of feels wrong. And I'm someone who maybe had, like, I was really into like a tech optimist of like the 90s, and
Hmm.
I think it was cool, but now I just think it's all like haunting and all disturbing, all the technology and all the influence on sports and everything. So I think it's a total bummer. And I'm someone who does gamble a little bit. So I
Okay.
would say probably like 1/10 of 1/100th of my salary. So I probably bet $100 a year or $200 a year. And I think that part of it is just my family gambles.
Okay.
But it was like kind of more romantic, I would say. Yeah, romantic to someone who didn't lose their house. But um,
Right.
being at like my uncle's house in the 90s and the Kentucky Derby, and he'd be betting $20, and
Yeah.
and again, there was people losing their whole lives and people, being killed for, illegal gambling back in the day. So not saying that it's all been like hunky dory. Um, but certainly it just does feel kind of more just all encompassing and like less fun, less romantic, and just more
Yeah.
kind of just terrible because now everyone can do it. And so there's
Right.
not that barrier to entry, but where before you have to find a guy, now you just log on the internet and can just empty your bank account just like that. So yeah, it's not good.
Yeah. There are, and with lots of different, or one aspect there, Pat, with hobbies, the the more commoditized hobbies become, the less hands-on and fun they are. So you have sports cards, baseball cards, football cards, where they're giant holding houses for, and maybe I'm sure you already know this, but
Yeah.
there are tons of really high-end baseball card collectors who own a ton of cards that they have never physically held, even through like protective packaging, because they're kept in these like safe houses, handled by people with white gloves that are showing them. via Zoom or video call, and they're making speculative purchases based on what they're seeing on their Zoom screen and being kept in climate-controlled, fireproofed environments in safe houses across the country. And it's hard to distinguish from stock portfolios where what I don't know, Pat, were you a baseball card collector
Yeah,
when you
absolutely.
yeah, so baseball cards and shoe boxes,
I'll have some.
putting
Yeah.
that putting them in a little container, rubber banding a few and bringing them to school and that sort of thing. That's that's gone. And I want to be careful not to overstate. But even the whole collectible toys and merchandise and being kept in original packaging says something about where we are as a culture. And I don't mean to shame or hurt people that are into collectibles, and they're a lot more valuable if they're unopened versus not. And that has an internal logic that makes sense to me, but there's still an upshot question there of something's happened uh, psychologically where things are so valuable that we can collect them, but not use them or play with them. So that's another all of the above. Okay, so I have the political question and the pastoral concern. Do you have anything else big picture beyond that, or can we go into these other couple things?
I'd say one last thing, like the future is here, and I don't like it. I feel like there's so many things that are like science fiction, um, and you always
Yeah.
think about science fiction as being out in like the future. I think a lot of it is happening now. A lot of the dystopian aspects, like it's here right now. Um,
Yep.
so I'll leave you with that lovely picture as we move on to the.
Yeah, one quick thing there, then the bigger question. What I think, and maybe this was built into a lot of the science fiction, and I don't recall it. I think the difference between what science fiction would predict and where we are is that as these advances happen in real time, they're happening in real time, where it's one thing to read or watch a science fiction movie that jumps 50 years, 100 years, 200 years in the future, and you're just shocked at these giant technological shifts. That's not how they happen as modern life unfolds. Everything is very incremental and gradual for the most part, where if people would be full-blown cyborgs today, and if little Sally and Johnny are in class with cyborg hybrid human computer human beings, we would freak out. But that's not going to be uh, one day all of that changes when magically there are cyborgs. There's going to be a ton of small steps of chips implanted and medical helps that are highly technologized, integrations of smartphone technology with user interface, and so on, where it's going to happen bit by bit by bit by bit. That's fun to think about. Okay, the bigger question, and Pat, I could see you getting excited with Marxism and capitalism, but the political question, and I don't have a ton of biblical intuition here, but it's worth it's worth raising the question. I think sports gambling, it does raise a question about the morality of capitalism, and your mileage, Pat, or others may vary. I do consider myself a capitalist, but there are downsides, and this is one of them. The question is, what is the morality of profit gained from self-chosen probable harm? Uh, what is the morality of conglomerates and companies generating profit based on self-chosen probable harm? And this is true of gambling. This was part of prohibition, alcohol,
Yeah.
cigarettes, lots of things where, and self-chosen. So by and large, companies don't force you to use these products, although there's a lot of interesting things to talk about within that. And alcohol in moderation, maybe to a lesser extent, but smoking in moderation, gambling in moderation, they're probably okay from a large scale health risk standpoint. but they are slippery slopes, and they're designed to make you want to do more and more and more. Uh, what is it moral for companies to sell and generate profit when you get more profit from the more you sell and the more users you entice into getting these products? I think for a lot of Americans, kind of the soft middle solution there is regulation and limiting, which is a practical solution, not a theoretical one. And I'm uncomfortable with kind of both poles from there, where pure profit motive with no limits or regulation is just going to exploit people forever. But then I'm also uncomfortable with more of a socialist answer where just you let the people, aka government, decide what you can buy and what you can't buy. And I that buzzes my freedom tower, Pat, where where I can't self-determine. So people are by and large self-determining here. Still, and this is true of gambling, the these are multi-billion dollar companies, not all of them, but many of them, and they employ computer programmers and mathematicians who constantly optimize models where they let people get you can win small but lose big. And that's a constant giant algorithmic conundrum where how do we let people keep winning small enough times that they think they'll win big, and how do we constantly calibrate models so that they're not winning too big, but they're winning just enough to keep them wanting to press in further. So all of that's designed, not a coincidence, and gambling companies make money off of taking money from you. That is an irreducible reality of the model, which is just I'll call it this way and then I'll shut up. It is a moral hazard of capitalism.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you pretty much nailed all of my thoughts as you were going through them. Is that like, is it moral to kind of like prey upon, even though, you might say like you're not trying to prey, you're providing a service, you're giving them an option and people choose what they do. But
Hmm.
is it really a choice for some people, or for a large amount of people? And so is it moral? I would probably say no. But like you said, okay, let's say you think it's not moral to whatever have these like vices out there free to everybody. Policing it creates so many problems and so many conundrums and costs money and tough
Yeah.
choices. And, it's just so complicated that, you kind of have to pick your poison there and kind of, go down with the ship either way. Yeah. So, but yeah, it seems like you're saying as far as like, is gambling like a sin? Probably not. But it can become one if it kind of rules your life, maybe.
Yeah.
Or what is that kind of where you're headed with that?
So let's talk about the pastoral concern.
Yeah.
As a pastor, do I either person to person or publicly from the pulpit or say in a podcast, and there's gradations here, advise against sports gambling? Do I encourage against it? Do I call it a sin and call people to repent?
And just this could be sports betting or like, going to the casino, I guess,
Totally.
all in the same.
Yeah. Yep. The where I am right now, so in the Presbyterian and Reformed tradition, there is always a wariness in the traditional phrase. I think it goes back to the Westminster Confession of Faith of binding the conscience, where we don't want to be extrapolate so much into the from scriptural commands to be so detailed that there are some things that the Bible allows for Christian freedom on, but then all of a sudden you're answering every casuistic question imaginable, and scriptures becomes this giant list of do's and don'ts, sort of like stereotypically Pharisees, where every aspect of daily life is micro-regulated. And there's always the danger of binding conscience when, hey, this is between you and God, read the scriptures yourself. Binding the conscience can also be used to duck things where the Bible is clear and you're actually not you're interpreting irresponsibly because the Bible is clear, but you're pretending that it's not. That's one danger on one side, but then on the other, yeah, like are we over-regulating behavior in ways that Scripture allows freedom? So I want to be careful not to bind conscience, but yeah, where I think where I am practically is I'm increasingly wary of the slippery slope. So casual wagers, couple $100 a year, that I don't really care, but but I am more aware of the ways in which this can become an addictive and destructive behavior. And I suspect that 5 or 10 years from now, I will wish that I pushed against gambling sooner
Mm.
than I might otherwise be inclined. And the reality is here too. So just as these gambling companies have mathematicians and programmers, they have behavioral psychologists and neurologists where the gambling apps are designed to be as dopamine inducing and therefore as addictive as possible. Where how can we gamify gambling in such a way that it gives you maximum quick hits of adrenaline and dopamine while at the same time taking your money? And there's really high-end science devoted to making this as addictive as possible. So it's not a byproduct, it's not an unintended consequence, it is an intended one. It's a practice that is designed for addiction, and we need to be wary of that. And sort of similar to alcohol, uh, it's not worth it to push it. Where if somebody has a tendency to over drinking or alcoholism, why keep flying so close to the flame when it's just better and easier and more God honoring to just get out of that orbit altogether. So I'm increasingly concerned. This is the first time on a podcast I have advised wariness towards sports gambling, and it'll probably make it into the pulpit at some point too. So it is a blinking light on my dashboard right now. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think it's the same way. I think I'm, yeah, again, as someone who like dabbles a little bit in it, if someone said, is should I gamble? It's like no, don't. If
Yeah,
if you haven't already done it, or if you have like high schoolers, like it fails the cost benefit analysis test, I think, pretty dramatically. Um,
totally.
you're not missing out on anything really. So yeah, I mean, again, as someone who kind of does it very, 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 very minimally, um, there's not much there, truly. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so if people want to tell Pat to stop gambling, they can write in to another with Jim at
That's right.
gmail.com.
Or if you have
Uh,
any tips on any upcoming
right.
information,
Oh,
don't.
sorry, go ahead.
No, say don't send me online, but you can come to my house. Just I'll give you my address. You can come and
Okay. Awesome. Last thing for me, Pat, and then we'll go. I wanted to mention here, I do have a good friend of mine from growing up in New Orleans who was a high-end, I shouldn't say his name, who was a high-end poker player at the only casino for a lot of years within the New Orleans city limits. It was a Harrah's at the foot of Canal Street, right beside the French Quarter. A really smart guy. He was a high-end poker player who was in the back room that would play poker with pro athletes that would come through town. This was in the maybe late 2000s, early 2010s. And I think this was legal, but part of why I'm not saying his name is I'm not sure. His job, so according to him, there was no cheating, but his job was to he was compensated, I think, by the casino for letting the pro athletes win little. And so he was like an awesome poker player, and there is some skill and like math to there's a lot of chance, but there's a lot of like Rain Man in
For
in
sure.
in there too. And he was coached up to say, hey, we don't want to let these pro athletes come in here, throw a ton of money around, but make
Yeah.
exponentially more money off of us. But then on the other hand, we don't want them to don't clean them out because they're just going to be angry and never
Come
and
back.
never come back. So his job was to be and he's my friend is a great people person, never met a stranger. Just be a great guy in the room and let them win little. So ton, the richest, most famous pro athletes in this is basketball, football. New Orleans doesn't have a baseball team, but NBA and NFL. My friend would say I've played poker with all of them. And so
Interesting.
good, good for him. If you could be that guy, be that guy.
Yeah.
But otherwise, beware.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think the last thing I'll say is like, and we had fun with it and we have a disclaimer, but there are people I know who have like gambling addictions, so obviously, the lightheartedness that there is some people definitely suffering,
That's
and
good.
we for sure obviously aren't minimizing that because that is something like struggle that people are really going through. And I don't think we were, but
Yeah.
just with everything, there's stories that are, more humorous and more devastating as far as all that like conversation for sure.
Yeah. So let me say this and then we'll wrap up. If this can sound like a pandering PSA, but if anybody's listening to this podcast and feels that they're in or moving towards addiction with
Yeah.
gambling, let me know. And the gospel is designed to give us freedom. Liberty is Latin for free people. And if this is something where you want liberation in Jesus, it's a process, it's a struggle, but the liberation that Jesus can give here is real. And we'd be happy to engage folks about this at Liberty Collingswood or more broadly. So that's a good word.
Yeah. Well,
Okay, Pat, we have we've solved another world issue right now.
right.
We'll keep going from here. Thanks for the conversation, Pat.
Well,
Thanks for
we got wild card.
Oh no, we have the wild card. I forgot. Okay,
Poor
shoot.
wild card. But
Yeah.
this is a more
Oh no.
quick hit. Um,
Okay.
Jim, why don't you,
The plane was going in for a landing, but we're pulling up again.
aside from a few artists, why don't you like modern music? That's the wild card. What is your problem with modern music?
The problem with modern music is either it sounds too much like older music or not enough like older music.
Oh, interesting. Okay, too much.
So the this why I don't like Led Zeppelin as an illustrative example for some of my conundrums with modern music. Led Zeppelin is a modern band from England. I'm kidding. They're not a modern
For you, they may
band.
be.
But yeah, exactly. The so Led Zeppelin, I mean, they were started in the late 60s. I think I'd have to go back and check, but their heyday was in the 70s. Sort of a English blues rock sort of band. When I was getting into blues music in my 20s, so 20 years ago plus, the they were mostly Chicago-based black artists, etc. Also South, Great Migration, etc. Um, as I was getting into blues, a lot of my friends said, "Hey Jim, you should listen to Led Zeppelin because they're blues and blues rock also." That was the first time I really did a deep dive into Led Zeppelin, and I didn't love it because the things that I liked most about Led Zeppelin were those blues roots, and I just thought to myself, I may as well just listen to these blues artists themselves as opposed to the pastiche. And the things that I didn't love about Led Zeppelin, the histrionics, the theatricality, the weird Stairway to Heaven, English Baroque thing that I just have never gotten in any way, shape, or form. Royal family, Prince Harry, all of that stuff doesn't make any sense to me at all. The Yeah, so I tried newer relatively and went back to older. So it is a little bit of a both and, Pat. The I drive Jesse often to and from school, drive with Jessie often to and from school. And so she has playlists and I listen to a lot of her music. It is really fun for me to hear bands that she's listening to and be able to point out to her and have some discussions about, oh, or there's I forget what group it was. Hey, there's a lot of Beach Boys here. Have you listened to the Beach Boys before? So telling her, yeah, listen to Pet Sounds and come back to this new band and see some of the connections there. The I my, Current music is most fulfilling to me when I can see some of those conversations unfolding between older and newer. And then there is hard edge of technologized aspects of newer music that I've never fully connected with. So even as a teenager, drum machine synthesizers, vocoders were were never my cup of tea, and as modern music kind of leans into auto-tune and programming, that's always been something that I've struggled with. And the newer bands that I like tend to be revival of older sounds anyway. But then on the other hand, I get that a lot of new music is awesome, and I respect the fact that I don't personally love all new music, and a lot of that's on me, not on the music and not on them. So I can do better. That's my bottom line. What do you think?
Okay, so yeah, the last thing I'll just add here is so you don't like
Yeah,
Daft Punk, got it? Um,
correct.
and then does this also apply? And if not, any idea why to like movies? Like there's the same detective stories, made here. There's the same comic book movies, the same villains, uh, TV, the same,
Hmm.
dramas about the same, family upheavals, literature, the same books about this or that, the other thing. So is there something that's different about music, whereas you may enjoy, maybe you kind of still long for more of the older stuff, but you will read a lot of newer fiction or movies or what have
Yep.
you?
Good question. I don't have a reason for this. Music is different. So with contemporary movies and fiction, comic book movies are an exception, and I think that's just because I have been a comic book reader for since growing up. But by and large, I do get tired of fiction and movies that just kind of are either IP
Yeah.
recycling characters or recycling themes when like, hey, I've read this before or I've seen this before. So music is in a different category. I don't know why. I'd have to think about that more.
All right, we'll leave it at that.
Okay, Pat, I do apologize for forgetting the on my notes page here I have word and world, but I need to because I don't prepare notes on Wildcard, it's not on my sheet, but that's it'll be on my sheet. It'll be on my template for next time. So apologies, but thank you for remembering to bring that up. Okay, we gotta go. Thanks for listening, everybody. Don't do anything crazy. Until next time. See ya.